Hi, everyone. Thanks for bearing with us for a few seconds while we got the technology working. So welcome to everyone in the room here in Geneva and to everyone on the line around the world who's dialed into this session. My name is Matthew Downer. I'm from the Mobile for Humanitarian Innovation program at the GSMA. We're a program with a mission to accelerate the delivery and impact of safe, efficient and dignified digital humanitarian assistance, all made possible with the support of the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And it's my absolute pleasure today to be facilitating this session, Important Digital Conversations, where we will be discussing the theme of digital technology for communication, engagement and accountability and participation for crisis-affected people and aid users. An important discussion as we balance the opportunities that technology brings, but the real risks of exclusion and harm if done incorrectly. I'm joined today by 4 excellent colleagues with a real depth and diversity of experience on these topics. Alex Ross is a seasoned humanitarian and is now the founder and lead for Loop, a small charity with the sole purpose of providing a collective accessible feedback and safe reporting mechanism for affected populations and organizations to engage with each other remotely. Ana Tomé Pires is a human rights lawyer and currently the global lead on digital accountability to affected people for UNHCR. She particularly focuses on digital information and communication channels and coordination of internal UNHCR AAP communities of practice. Fan Man Zhang is an expert in communicating with and engaging communities and an advocate for humanitarian relief actors to be more communicative and responsive to those that they serve. He has worked in humanitarian and development work across 4 continents, aiming to improve communication and information sharing. He is currently the Director for Capacity Building and Technology at the CDAC Network. Margot Fortin has worked with Impact/Reach for the last 6 years, with experience across several country missions and a continued focus on research and evaluation related to AAP. In the last year, she joined HQ here in Geneva and heading up the Accountability and Inclusion Unit. As well as contribution from our panelists, we have some pre-recorded contributions from colleagues who are unable to join us here in Geneva. I also would like to acknowledge that 2 colleagues that had been supposed to submit some content were based in Sudan and for obvious reasons were not able to do so. And I'm sure everyone here joins us sentiment in hoping that the situation there de-escalates very soon. We'll be holding plenty of time for audience input and we really hope to hear your comments and your questions. Those of you on the line, please do put them in the Q&A as you go and we'll make sure to feed them into the conversation. And those of you in the room, please keep them in mind as we go and we'll come to you at the end. With this in mind, our first question is based on the assumption that we do need to engage with aid users and crisis-affected communities digitally, an assumption that we might necessarily want to challenge. And so my first question to the panel is whether they agree with this assumed necessity, and if so, why is it so important? And before I pass to our first panelist, we actually want to play a quick video to kind of frame this conversation, hopefully.
Emocionada por este descubrimiento de la chama, porque yo soy, como quien dice, fanática del WhatsApp, fanática del Facebook, ¿verdad? Y esta vía, pues, que crearon, pues para mí es, aparte de muy importante, porque nos permite a nosotros una comunicación directa, una comunicación que ya yo había pensado que faltaba. Es una herramienta que de verdad me gusta y estoy bien agradecida de que la hayan creado.
So with that quick framing, Anna, I'll turn to you. So the question is digital engagement with the communities that we serve essential?
Thank you, Matt. As you can see, whether we feel as humanitarian agencies we are ready or not, our population is already on the digital world. We have always, as our traditional protection work within UNHCR, have been taken as our mandate to provide information and access to services, life-saving services, as offline activities. It is natural that now that digital is prevalent in people's lives that we engage with them. But is it to us to decide? Not really. It is a demand that comes from the community. It is feedback that we receive. People are ready and want, despite connectivity and literacy challenges, they are expecting more than what we are delivering online. May it be a means of updating their personal information, have ownership of their own data, have access at a timely manner to information on what we do, who we are, what are the limitations to our work, how to contact us, and who should they contact if we are not able to provide the type of service that they want available all throughout. It is also imperative that we find alternatives to complement our offline work. Our contact centers, hotline, and our staff on the ground. And very cliche example is during COVID, we were not able to be in person, but the needs are nonstop. Therefore, yes, I think it is essential, and I guess we may engage in other aspects of it going forward. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thanks. And I know Fanman, you have some thoughts on this one as well.
Thank you, Matthew. And yeah, I just would like, just add on what Anna just said. It's a utterly crucial area. I mean, to be engaged in digitally, because quite frankly, digital engagement is now about 20, 25 years old. So it's not hardly a new thing. It's more of a catch-up thing. And ideally, we should need to catch up and meet people where people actually communicate. I remember 15 years ago, people were still discussing radio as innovation, which is fantastic because radio was invented 70 years before that. So it'd be nice if we could actually start engaging people when they connect digitally in quicker than 70 years, maybe in 20 years. So as we are now. So the key thing is that people will want to communicate. The reason why it is so essential is ask yourself a simple question. If I went around this room right now collecting all of your digital devices and then threw them in the bag and then say spend the rest of the day without any form of digital engagement or communication, would you feel an overwhelming sense of anxiety that you have no idea what's going on? You cannot contact the people you need to be in contact with. You cannot find information of when to get the next bus. And that's the same when people in need, in crisis, they need to have access. They're used to, most people now are used to having quick engagement. And so it is a tool that people are using every day, and that's why engagement is necessary. And also, it's hugely accessible. I'm tired of hearing people saying low literacy, can't use digital, when digital is data. So it's audio, it's video. It can be all kinds of different oral and visual ways of storytelling. And so it's actually a really good accessibility tool. So you're working without one hand behind your back. And finally, it is somewhere where we're all going to have to be our living now ourselves. So we just have to be there.
Yeah, shall I? Thanks for that. I agree with everything that's been said. What we find is there's other opportunities that we haven't had before. So using the digital gives us additional potential to be able to have greater impact that wasn't there before. And that includes real-time qualitative and quantitative data that you can filter, that we can have open access to, so more people can have access to that information. And you can have visualizations to bring out the so what of the feedback and engagement. So it can really have an amplifying impact by using technology. And then also what we're finding with Loop is that the anonymity and independence that can be provided through technology is something that is harder to be provided through other means. So with people have choices, and maybe often they prefer to feedback about very sensitive issue face to face, but if they don't feel safe to, and we've had people saying things like reporting abuse can be a life-threatening action in my country, then doing so digitally and ensuring that they have anonymity in that process is a real advantage and an approach that wasn't available to them previously. So it's definitely an opportunity, not just an essential.
Yeah, maybe echoing the points that were made by all the panelists before, I think there's no question that we need to engage with communities digitally. Of course, it helps with expanding the depth, the frequency, and the convenience of the engagement and the information sharing that we have with communities. And from an assessment point of view, I work for Impact Reach, which we do assessments and analysis. Of course, there's great direct benefits coming with opportunities associated with crowdsourcing, community inputs, or information about needs. Without being always the one soliciting, more finding ways, designing ways to capture the inputs that are already out there. And in that sense, and that also will apply to community engagement in general, I would say that regardless of whether we engage or not, people are increasingly already engaging with us and in ways that perhaps we don't perceive or conceptualize as community engagement, right? People write to us, tag our agencies on social media to point out gaps in programs, needs that are not met. And all of these things are things that are already happening, and there's a value, echoing what Fanman was saying, to meet people where they are and learn how to leverage this. And there's something fantastic, I would say, in the fact that maybe with these technologies, we, for the first time, get to be in a situation where we as a sector don't control the terms of the engagement. And other people kind of dictate the conversation. And I think we should have more of that and encourage that more and more.
Great, thanks all. And I guess before we jump into the meat of how to do this effectively, I want to acknowledge the elephant in the room of these conversations, which is it's not a secret that the use of digital technology brings a whole new set of risks that we haven't fully thought through at every angle of, and emerging technology brings emerging risk. And so I want to ask the panel, what do you see as the biggest challenges when we think about, and the biggest risks that we think about when we're doing digital engagement? And importantly, what's the best way that we can think about mitigating these as opposed to avoiding them by not using these engagement tools? And Margot, I'm going to come back to you first on this one.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think there's definitely within a certain segment of our sector, there's relatively good awareness of what the broad categories of needs, of risks are when it comes to using digital technologies. At the same time, things are moving so quickly that we always have to be anticipating the future technologies and the risks, for example, data protection risks that will be associated with things that we don't even, or we can't even anticipate will exist at some point. So there's a need for more research on that and to keep talking about these risks. Obviously, the humanitarian digital divide, I'm stealing this concept from previous people who have worked on this, well-known articles as well that have covered this, is something that we need to keep looking at. So the extent to which mobile ownership or use of technology is segmented across certain demographic factors generally, and that some people can get kind of automatically left out from some of those channels just by virtue of not having a phone or not having access to the proper infrastructure. So we need to keep looking at that. We need to keep looking at making sure that the channels that we think make sense are aligned with what people are saying makes sense for them as well. And just keep in each humanitarian responses a good basic understanding of what the infrastructure is like and how it's evolving, because these things evolve quickly. This is information that should be available, at least a base of information in all humanitarian response. It should be a public good, and it should be shared more proactively by those who collect it. So maybe a little appeal for more information sharing on that.
Thanks, Margot. And I mean, definitely, I think everyone in the room will agree that the inclusion aspect, understanding who we leave behind when we go solely digital, is vital. It's something that we at the GSMA, with I think all the partners on the panel, have discussed in the past. Alex, I'm going to come to you next, but before we do, we've got the first of our pre-recorded clips. So I'm going to play now a clip from Nanette, who is the CEO of EcoWeb in the Philippines and who is the local host of Loop, Alex's organization.
Technology has the potential to significantly improve humanitarian and development actions. Technology could enable faster and more effective responses to crises and enable real-time data-informed actions. However, with the increased use of technology comes a need as well for accountability to ensure that technology is being used appropriately and ethically and does not reinforce existing power dynamics and widen social inequality. Often, data gathered from communities are only available to and benefit those who paid for and have control over it. The source, the supposed real owner of data, are often left to wonder how their data made a difference to making their lives better. With clear intention and proper use, technology can help address inequality and finally usher in collective accountability. It can empower people and strengthen protection of the crisis affected and vulnerable communities. But it requires a stronger and ethical collaboration between humanitarian and development organizations, technology companies, and local communities. Like in gathering feedback using digital technology, the real owner of the data, the people should be assured of confidentiality when desired to be protected from risk. Technology should be based on open data principles so that people will have access to their shared information and be able to use their data to inform and stand up for the desired actions. Talk to Loop is an example of an initiative that makes use of technology so the voice of the people can be better heard to inform humanitarian and development programming. But EcoWeb's experience shows that the potential of technology to strengthen collective accountability can only be achieved if power holders are truly committed to making the people at the center in designing the use, development, and management of technology.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that's Nanette from the Philippines, who's the host of Loop in the Philippines, along with a network of local actors, so it's locally owned. I guess Nanette is talking a lot about power, and with that, the real question is, who is technology a risk for? It's here and it will grow, as we've spoken to before with the other questions, and if we remain behind the curve, it'll be designed with a for-profit structure, which will lead to widening inequalities, widening underrepresentation, widening misinformation and increased trust deficit. So the idea really is, if we design technology now and we get on the front foot facing forward and we design it with humanity as the central part of the framework, we can, in a collective approach, collective meaning collective community approaches, community design in the feedback and in the use of the technology based around what's relevant to them, then we can add value and we can ensure that this risk is averted and that it's safe, inclusive, appropriate, etc. for the different audiences. So I guess that's an opportunity about how to mitigate the risk, that we really need to be proactive and on the front foot around the data, who holds the design, etc. of using technology.
Maybe I'll move down one. Fan Man.
Thank you. The interesting thing about this question about risk, and like Alex says about risk and who for, because the thing I think we have to consider is that risk is inherent in the work we do. Before we deploy, I mean, I used to sign off deployments and things, and people had to do a risk assessment. And we had to do risk assessments for people going to conflict zones, the risk assessment for people going to natural disasters like earthquakes. We also had to do a risk assessment for people going to offices. So we couldn't wait for an organisation and bureaucracy that you actually had to do a risk assessment for every time you visited an office for the first time. What the office safe, and of course, all of them carry different risk. You do a much simpler risk assessment for an office, water, plants, loose carpet, than you would do for going somewhere where there's conflict, bullets, bombs, explosions. So the interesting thing about when we talk about digital engagement risk, we always say, what's the risk of digital engagement? Digital engagement covers so many things. And the idea and the danger here, the real danger is that we assume it's one risk. It's multiple risks. And I think one of the risks that we have is that we misunderstand the risks, because we don't have enough expertise and do a risk assessment on what is dangerous, what isn't, and when it should be used and when it shouldn't. And the real risk here has been not using it. And as mentioned previously, is that digital tools allow us to reach for people to communicate confidentially. It is as well as being used for people to talk to people in direct messaging in different ways. And by that, we'll only reach 40% of people. That's 40% of people who risk not being contacted if we basically don't understand the risks and decide it's too dangerous to use. Then there's the risk that we always comment on in community engagement, and that's the risk of not taking part. There's a risk of misinformation and disinformation. And the risk there, again, is not using it, because whether we engage or not in these conversations, misinformation and disinformation will be part of the conversation. In my spare time during the pandemic, I enjoyed reading about misinformation about the smallpox vaccine from 200 years ago, printed on pamphlets, handed out to people. There was no, people talk, people discuss, people get the wrong end on the stick. And if it's considered too dangerous to engage in these conversations, those conversations will happen without us, whether we're there or not. So the risk assessment is really important, and it's really important to find out what kind of risk we are facing in the way we're engaging. Data is a risk, communication is a risk, but they're different risks.
Thanks, Femin. And Anna, I think interesting to hear from your angle, UNHCR as a protection agency as well. Yeah, your perspective on this question.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, it's indeed, we are extremely committed to data protection. The feedback that we receive needs to be protected, because it entails a lot of layers of information, personal experiences, and information that people quite often so mistaken as social media as a safe space. What I mean is the risk that comes associated with engaging in digital communication and through technology is that quite often we engage in channels, number one, that people are not necessarily using. And that's the risk of hitting an empty room. So we need to meet people in their preferred and trusted channels. Understanding what are the preferred and trusted channels means that we conduct an information and communication needs assessment first before implementing any type of deployment of any tool and platform. It needs to be convenient to the user. It needs to be indeed putting the user at the center of the design. At the same time, we need to engage in mitigation of the risks. It is a balance. It's a constant balance, and I agree fully with Femin that it is a risk. There are many of risks, but what are the minimum standards that we should comply for every type of new venture? We need to set up minimum standards for an X platform and an X channel. There is also the risk of opening channels and using the digital engagement platforms as a tick-the-box exercise. It is not. It's not sufficient to go out there and develop this platform that, number one, does not consider what the people are wanting the most out of it. Is it useful? Are we meeting their accessibility needs? Are we engaging in a platform that we as an operation, that our local operations will have the capacity to manage the feedback that is receiving? Are we capable of responsibly ensure that we are going to respond to the query and that is going to meet their perspective? Are we opening variety channel? Do people understand who they are talking to? Or do people get extremely confused by one organization providing the same information in completely different heavy organizational jargon, but talking about the same thing? And last but not least, I agree again with Femin when we say, what is the risk of not engaging? The not engaging is that we are always lagging behind. Misinformation, disinformation, the harm, and fraud happens within that space in such a quick manner. And so repeatedly, we see fraudulent schemes arising from our lack of presence or our disengagement by risk aversion. I'll stop here for the next one. Over to you.
Anything else before I move on? Great, so we covered risk, and so I think maybe to bring this session something more tangible, we know that there are already a whole host of great examples of humanitarians using digital technology to engage with, participate with, and be accountable to their service users. And so I think we take some of this session to highlight some of those. And so I'm really interested, Alex, to hear from you about Loop and how you think that your platform is meeting this need and filling a gap.
Thanks for the opportunity to explain a little bit about what Loop is. So it's a locally owned collective feedback and safe reporting mechanism that uses different channels depending on what local people choose, and for people to be able to feedback about what's important to them at any time. So 24 hours, 7 days a week, into an independent actor. They can be anonymous. They can choose how much information they want to share, and then that feedback can be sent directly to different actors, local or government authorities, UN, INGOs, project implementers, etc., who can respond directly to them in their own language of choice. And Loop is like an intermediary, so we just get that back to the original author in their language of choice through the mechanism that they provided. So we're just providing the technology that's like a mesh, really trying to join up people who don't know where to provide feedback, who don't know where to feedback safely, or who maybe want to have a different mechanism. So I think choice is a really important element. It's important for people to have choices depending on their circumstances about where and how they want to feedback. And that's what we're trying to provide through this locally owned long-term feedback mechanism that is hosted and owned nationally and can be there before, during and after a crisis, and can be used by any actor in that country. So that's a quick overview of what we're doing, and it's basically been designed off the back of many years of talking about a gap in the system and having an independent feedback and accountability mechanism that can be used collectively. And so that's the sort of the in essence of where this design of the technology came from.
Before I move on, Alex, I think really interesting you talk about locally owned. It's something we hear a lot about at the moment. It's something we're trying to move towards. So are you able to give an example of some of the setup or the types of organizations you partner with, and maybe where Loop is currently working?
Yeah, so we're in Somalia, Zambia, the Philippines, Indonesia, Poland, and Ukraine. We only go to countries where we've been invited to go through local networks of organizations. And then we are hosted by so we set up a charitable franchise structure. So local civil society organization will employ the moderators of Loop. So they're local staff, they sit within the ecosystem, the national ecosystem. They know what the risks are. They know some of the nuances of the languages. So when they're translating, etc., they can bring all of that to the fore. Some of the risks, they have access, etc. So these charitable franchises host Loop, and then we're very small, global, providing the technology that they request. So they'll say, please, can you add on Telegram, for example, in Ukraine? So then we'll work on how to add that on, and then any of the countries that they're working in can use that channel as well. And it's sort of evolving together based on what they're seeing local organizations and local people wanting. And then we try to provide that, making sure that we're always meeting global standards and integrating into existing systems and not duplicating things. So that's the structure. It's a bit new.
Great, thanks so much. And I guess then shifting somewhat in scale and size of organization, Anna, from UNHCR's perspective, yeah, what's a good example that you see in your own operations?
Well, there's no, as I said, there's no one size fits all. We try to provide information and communication opportunities, particularly encouraging two-way communication as much as possible. Currently, what you're seeing on the screen is a demonstration of how our help sites work. Currently, we have 112 websites covering 112 countries. We are working on 40 more, and we are hoping to have global coverage soon. What these sites are is localized information about how we work, who we work with, how to contact us, and how to contact our partners. Demystifying a few of the concepts, let's say resettlement queries, for example, what it is, what is not, reinstating that you should not pay for it, and all other sorts of local contextualized consideration of the individual. What is a good example is, in some countries, a particular type of document might be of extremely relevance for the population that we are using as our target, that there is our targets. Let's say in a particular context, our asylum seekers and refugees quite often engage in Uber driving. In this context, what would be, besides clarifying what the UNHCR what doesn't do and how to contact us through our hotline, it's also useful to pinpoint to that population where to get a driver's license, and if they have the right to or not. This is also a very good point where we can signpost organizations that are doing similar work that might be able to complement or come in whenever we cannot do it personally or can do better in certain areas or have a better penetration in certain aspects. Let's say education opportunities. There are some organizations that will provide training and skill share opportunities, and we are able to do that. In addition to that, we have also made available a possibility to submit feedback online and through a safe platform. That feedback is going to be dealt with by the operation locally, understanding really the context and the type of jargon that is being used, the language that is being used, and be able to respond at that local level. We have had 14 million visits in 2022 with 89 platforms only at the time. You see that there's plenty of people that will use. The beauty of it is that it's a website and you can get through a Google search. You and I, we search for the opening hours of a shopping mall through Google. Why would we assume that people will download an app, for example, before knowing what is in it? So they will find out the information before. We made available alternative methodologies of information, text-to-speech functionality, visual translations, pinpointing to everything that all of the speakers have said. There are limitations, of course. We do not presume that by having a digital information platform, we're going to cater for all. This means that we have to adapt the text. You have to really put the user at the center, and there is room for improvement always. Reassessing, conducting consultation processes through the website itself, but also going offline and displaying this information to people that would not necessarily be our common users. Getting information on how we transform the platforms that we are using, and this is valid for all of it, not just for help sites, but all of the interactions that we have. How could we make it possible or more appealing for them to engage through that platform or even to get that information? Comparing if the frequently asked questions that we are trying to respond on our communication and information channels are matching what people are asking through our alternative methods offline, may it be through contact centers or may it be through a global engagement and partnership with Google and understanding what are the search keywords. So making the most out of technology and delivering locally and contextualized response. We also working with WhatsApp and Telegram chatbots and two-way communication channels. My colleague Casita that is sitting here on the ground, she's leading that role now in no longer being, and you've seen in the first video that we displayed, that was an innovation video. We don't sit at innovation. This is core to our protection work now. It is digital accountability to affected people. There is more and more demand for us to learn from pilot projects, but also implement it at a global level and make sure that we are doing it with the best standards that we can. There's been also interagency efforts as within the Ukraine response. We could see a good example of collaboration between UNICEF and UNHCR on getting the blue dots that are physical in the emergency response, and we getting them to the digital platforms, and that became the digital blue dots. This is basically an information hub where you can find services, shelter, food, who to contact, who does what and doesn't do. All of the above, I guess, from what I have just spoken. These are some of the initiatives. This is not to say that our operations are not going ahead and innovating and there is no room for improvement. Self-service is something, an area that we are particularly trying to focus now. Case status update in our organization is quite relevant because we do case management. So understanding what stage they are in and manage some anxiety and some expectations as well of how long it's going to take for the processing and what exactly to expect. Back to you.
Thank you. Very quickly, so I mean, you provided a whole number of examples there. I think a lot that's incredibly interesting. I think one follow-up there, so we talked around the two-way communication chatbots. I think one thing the sector has continually struggled to do is to do two-way interaction meaningfully and finding ways to process and respond to the incoming information in a way that users want and expect. So I guess quickly, do you have any lessons or key takeaways from the work you've done on that to date and how others might do it successfully?
Well, the two-way communication, it is something that is heavily dependent on the local capacity of the operation. There are quite often times that we can only manage chatbots in the sense that we are not really providing a two-way feedback mechanism, but we are providing timely information. The lessons learned is more and more we should strive to have and implement safe two-way communication. It's not to say that we're going to start all from scratch WhatsApp conversation one-to-one, because that is not what we envision as a safe two-way communication channel. So maybe that's one. Number two is really understand what are the people's preferred and trusted channels and engage through them and understand how to do it safely, do it collaboratively, do not work in silos. I guess those are the biggest challenges.
Thank you. Margot, on this one, anything to add from the Reach perspective? No? Okay, we'll jump to the next question. So then we've looked backwards somewhat on risks and thought about now. And so my question is looking to the future and then thinking of, for the panel, what do you think are the biggest opportunities or the nearest wins that we've got? Oh, sorry, yeah, I've actually skipped way past and I need to go back to FanMan very quickly. Sorry, everyone, my notes are seemingly fallible.
Oh, no, that's absolutely fine. It's good to have some two-way communication. Yes, the thing interesting about the two-way communication, I just want to jump on that for a second. It's the fact that there are two-way communication. It's just the fact that you're responding on the website. That's responding on social media, responding on posts. That is two-way communication. That can reach thousands in one go. It still shows you're engaged, right? Yeah. I mean that's just something that's something that's great to see. So it's two-way means in different ways. And the reason I mention that is because it's we have an example as well of a small organisation, completely different scale, but doing very similar things to what Anna's doing. And we're going to hear from Magdalena Miteva from the Foundation for Access to Rights, FAR Bulgaria. And they work on refugee info, and they're also supported by IRC, who is a CDAC member. But the key thing here is, with example Magdalena's going to explain here is, Foundation to Access for Rights have a website and they share information and they have a social media presence, the usual ways of disseminating information, right? But what they found was they had difficulty reaching certain groups, and it's to understand that digital is part of the communication toolkit that you have, and it's part of a package of work, and you take multiple approaches. So I'll let Magdalena explain about an issue they had and how they got around it, and keep listening for the discussions about two-way work and that's how important that is.
One example I can tell you, because for a long time we had issues with reaching the Pashto community here in Bulgaria. We didn't know how to reach them, even digitally. And lately we started using TikTok only for them, so that we can make short videos for them and introduce them to information that is important to them and they should know their rights. So we used digital tools to reach people, to inform them and to have more impact on the issues that are important to us, so that we can actually achieve some kind of change and difference. And we do strongly believe that being informed empowers refugees to make decisions, to decide what is good for them. So in a way we use it in this way. But one more thing that we use digital tools for is also to provide legal aid, especially for those who are not in the big cities or are somewhere away and they don't have direct access, in-person access to a lawyer. We do use our migrantlife.pg platform to provide free digital legal aid by a specialist through our request assistance module. So these are the two ways: information provision and also legal aid provision is strongly used in our team.
How important is it to have comments? How important are the comments in your social media applications? The ability for you to respond in real time.
It is very important. I mean, we all the things that we do there, we take the information, we take what we have to do from the people. So we try to hear them, to see what their issues are, what their gaps in information are, and we ask them, what do you need? What kind of information do you need? So that we can then proceed to writing articles, to providing special services for them. So it is very important. That's why in our organizations we have these digital liaison community officers, who are people from the community, speaking their language, Farsi, Pashto, Arabic, Ukrainian at the moment, Ukrainian and Russian, where they can, we have this closed Facebook groups, Telegram groups, also WhatsApp chats groups, where people communicate with each other and with our digital community liaison officers for their needs and what they want to know, what kind of information they want. Otherwise, I mean, we cannot just assume that they need certain information. We have to know what they need actually. So in this way, it is very important to hear them and to listen to them, so that we can, our work is based on their needs.
Before I jump ahead again, anything else to add there, Fanman?
Yeah, just to say that the key thing is that they had difficulty reaching the Pashto community in person. And it was basically, and it was using TikTok, which is an area where there were people sharing information, that they built trust and they built openings. And also they had limited staff members. So, but by communicating through that widely, they built a lot of impact through the community quickly. Because even though TikTok was used by a certain amount of the community, that community lived in families where they spoke to other members of the community, and it became a trusted brand. And branding is important in the digital world.
Great, so I'll try again on the next question now. So go again, looking to the future, what does the panel think are the opportunities for better digital engagement and accountability? Margot, I'll come to you as you didn't go on the last one.
Yeah, thanks. I guess to start with, doing digital engagement and accountability better starts with the same starting point as doing any kind of engagement better. So it's about, as many people have pointed out before, addressing the power dynamics that have meant that we've controlled the information flow for so long. And technology in itself does not solve those issues, of course, as was abundantly discussed here. It also holds the power to entrench exclusion even further. So we have to be careful. That being said, I guess the good news is that it doesn't have to be something that we disengage from entirely because it's scary and because we see those risks. There are ways to look into leveraging technologies more regularly while accounting for these risks as much as possible, and also while understanding what technologies are convenient and make sense in every one of the contexts where we work. So once we do identify a problem that could be better solved through the use of technologies, there are several tools that we can use to help us design engagement strategies that are user-centric, context-specific, and to do so at relatively low cost, I would say. So there are, of course, the resources that many people in the room will already know. So the media landscape guides, the information ecosystem assessments, to name a few. In addition to that, I think individual agencies have different toolkits. Anna mentioned a little bit what UNHCR is looking at when they design their own strategies to mitigate risks as well. On our side, our team in the past few years have been working with GSMA and in collaboration with ETC to develop a specific toolkit that's called the Connectivity Needs and Usage Assessment Toolkit, which is essentially meant to be a toolkit that includes several tools that allow us to look at the kind of core dimensions of what we need to look at when designing those strategies. So obviously user preferences and what is already being used and what could potentially be used based on the existing infrastructure. So there's some tools in there about signal strength mapping, for example, connectivity mapping. And we are able with these tools to collect some data on mobile usage and practices related to to digital use across several demographics. So you're able to compare, of course, between men and women, between different categories of people, so that at the end of the day, you're able to design a strategy that leverages technology where it helps, but also accounts for those that won't necessarily be reached by technology, and so where we maybe make sure that we always have this kind of additional layer to reach people who might prefer to be reached through more traditional communication channels. And on that, I would say that in as Reach, we do multi-sector needs assessments across several humanitarian contexts. And one thing that does come out when we ask people for their preferences when it comes to channels of communication, it's not a given that people overwhelmingly cite technologies or apps and so on as their preferences. Even in places where we might kind of assume so, there is still a tendency, not a tendency, but a trend for people to continue to say, we like receiving information through the radio. We like getting a good old phone call. And perhaps even more importantly, we like getting information face to face and having an opportunity to engage in a way where the communication is not closed and where we can respond and engage meaningfully. So yeah, I guess that's it. And just to mention on the toolkit that I was referring to, I think I might speak for both Reach and GSMA in saying that any agencies that want to use it, there is resources and kind of support from both of us to help out from a technical point of view to help adapt the toolkit to a different context. So don't hesitate to reach out. End of the self-promotion.
And maybe I might ask, I have colleagues on the line who might drop the link into the chat for the toolkit, which could be very helpful. Fanman.
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to pick up on one quick point. And by the way, I just really want to echo what Margot said, which is research is absolutely critical. And when I say research, I don't mean do your own research. There is a ton of research. And if I can plug all of our colleagues here who do way more research than even we have done in CDAC. We have great media landscape guides, by the way, so worth looking at them. They have digital moment. But my colleagues here have actually done fantastic work and much more. So, I mean, that was the problems, I think, is that people dive into this thinking it's an area that people don't have background in. And there's a lot of things people can have background in. There's the key thing is that one of the examples is that I would say to do it better is to understand why you want to engage people. What is the purpose of your engagement? If you want to do it better, understand, is it just to do information sharing, or is it to gather feedback? Is it to have a two-way engagement? Is it to assess feeling? Because then once you know actually what you want to do, then you can design something better. And if you're not aware of how to work this, work with somebody. Because I would say one of the things the example we just saw there is a small organization that actually has a very good engagement practice and knows what they're doing. They could scale up. Perhaps they could work with you. They could need assistance. You can share. If we were going to use the radio better, as Margaret said, some people prefer using the radio. A terrible idea would be to build your own radio station where one already exists. Build a new mobile phone network rather than working with mobile providers. So, and it's yet how often do we see people building their own digital engagement space when others already exist? So the thing is to go back to earlier, to understand what you want to use this for, understand where to use to the level of your ability, and then partner with somebody, because this is a new area for many people. I mean, it will be for much longer, but at the moment it is. I used to work in radio, and people used to make used to awards and jokes about the worst terrible PSAs on radio because every person who spent a 6-day course on engagement thought they could do radio. So so now think about how that relates to how we attack engagement. And also think about using different technologies that might be helpful. People always go for the immediate ones that has all the, that we see the Facebook, that's online. One of the most interesting digital uses I've seen was gathering feedback with was hard finding enumerators who could write quickly and where people prefer to give verbal open answers. So the technology people used was transcription software and hand recorders, followed by a light touch AI assisted, but not completely AI, word analysis. They were working in Spanish. So there was the tools available in Spanish are really good now. So using all that together, transcription tools, suddenly you had the ability to transcribe masses of information and feedback that could not been done by hand. And that's a use of community engagement technology that has nothing to do with the things I've been talking about earlier about using two-way engagement as a different form of doing it. So work together with people, talk to people who know what they're talking about, work with other partners, and be humble enough to hand over work and share work with people when necessary. Most of the platforms we talk about here are open and would actually would work in cooperation. And there's one more thing I would like to add about interesting that Margaret said about preferences. Again, think hard about when people prefer to work online, because this has been thrown back a lot when I discuss this, going yes, but people prefer not to go online, and that's absolutely great. So I'm speaking to the people who are attending this panel at home. We found out most people prefer to have face-to-face meetings. So Matthew, can we switch off the feed now, because digital engagement, because we prefer to have face-to-face. So we should switch off all the people at home with the cameras on. So please. Good, sorry, but that would be terrible, right? So now people can join us around the world. But that doesn't mitigate the fact that I think many of us prefer to be here in person, because I'm now looking at the people in the room, they're here in person. Both can work. You might not prefer it, but it's maybe more useful. Thank you.
Does anyone in person want to follow on from that one?
Is there anyone still online?
Sorry, please come back online.
Yeah, I will not repeat the points made, but just to make sure that I do give credits, that I do agree with the colleagues. I'm going to try to be a bit more practical, perhaps, than since we've spoken about the heavy stuff, on a bit about what are the real opportunities to enhance the digital engagement. Number one, engage with the community, empower them to develop their own methods of providing information, communicating with each other, not only with each other, but also with the organizations that are there providing support. How can we do that? We can do that through the community-led organizations that are very well organized and somehow so very sophisticated. They will have the knowledge and the penetration in the community, perhaps, that we as organizations might not. Engage the youth. The youth is more prone to digital. It is a given. And it might be also an entry point, for example, in households where you have elderly that will unlikely engage through digital channels with organizations. But that make sure that that information is going there. Allowing information and communication channels to be offered in different formats, catering for all. Thinking about minorities, thinking about the less likely to engage. And again, having this joke being made, I'll also bring another venture. We cannot, as organizations, think that we will have one solution, right? So we need to do as many as we can, as much as we can. If we cater for this particular portion of the population that is keen on engaging on digital communication, we might be more likely to engage with people that are in need of the face-to-face communication. one last point before I let Alex come with her points is ongoing consultation and feedback and surveying user experience on the platforms that you design. Assess their relevance, assess if they are indeed helpful, if they are impactful, if they are being offered in the format that they think is optimal. Is there anything out there that could serve as an example and inspiration for us to improve our platforms? It is very unlikely that someone will tell to our face saying, no, we don't like this platform. It is very unlikely that they will do that, even though they might not like it. But the risk of losing that channel is greater than the possibility. So make sure that whenever we do some consultations and feedback and surveys, and we put out there online, offline about our digital engagement, that we present the question not on a yes or no format, is that we really think that we are allowing people to provide feedback on our platforms and our digital engagement, and that they feel that they are comfortable to come forward and suggest how to improve.
So then final thoughts, finally, before we come to the floor for questions, and please, if you're online, start putting them in the chat box. At risk of maybe some duplication from the conversation we've had, but it's never harmful to reiterate a good point. I'm going to go down the panel starting with Alex and ask everyone for one, maximum two final thoughts and recommendations based on today's discussion.
So 21 years ago, I was in the south of Iraq and I had 10 minutes a month on a Thuraya satellite phone to be able to communicate out. We're not in that situation anymore. We should be using technology to design a system that we all want to see localized, shared power, long-term, building trust, delivering greater impact, greater efficiencies. So I think there's a massive opportunities and hopefully we're all on board with that.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. Oh, you're more advanced than me. We were basically having to put tapes in the packages and post them out from southern Iraq 20 years ago. So I would say the recommendation is to understand that this is part of a toolkit. And I in a way, I'm just sort of like, partly speaking from Anna, we said it first, that the in-person and the digital can only work hand in hand. They reinforce each other. And our recommendation is also, as kind of turn it around also, as mentioned from the example we had, use digital to find people where they are, and that includes minorities. Minority groups exist online that can maybe hard to meet in person as well. So always consider the fact that when they're meeting people where they are, we always talk about the large platforms and the platforms and channels they are using, but also think about the ones that maybe people are using to hide, that we do need to reach, and they are sharing information online because it allows well, the users perceive it allows the security for them to communicate with each other, but they're open sites and we can work with that. So I would say work with people where they are and think of this as a package of work that works in existence of other forms of communication, other forms of engagement. It doesn't exist by itself and it's never either or.
Well, I guess after having spoken a lot today, I guess what we can say as a recommendation is assess people's needs, assess people's wants, assess the panorama and this and the substance, design with the user at the center, with their needs, with their wishes at the center, implement, consult and receive feedback, assess at the same point and implement and go and do this ongoingly, do this intentionally, consult at every opportunity, receive feedback in every type of engagement that you have. Review the structure, review the language, make due consideration to accessibility needs, understand that there are more than just physical disabilities. There is situational needs that need to be considered when you're drafting. In displacement, in the spectrum that we work in, it is a disability factor to people's understanding of basic information. So provide information not in a heavy jargon, legalistic, complex terminology. Be practical. Think about the user as a person, put it at the design, diversify the format, of course, and continue to test. Think about personas. Who are you designing to? A single female head of household within the Ukraine spectrum will not have the same level of comfort with the digital environment, let's say with a single female, let me say a Latin like me, in their own context. We will not engage the same. Think about how different each type of person will, each type of person will engage with the platforms, and make sure that you design for them and not for your own tick the box exercise.
Yeah, on my side to close, I guess I would just refer back to the point I've made in the session regarding the importance of participatory evidence-based design for digital engagement strategies, and making sure that those are aligned with people's preferences. And here I would agree with Fanman that preferences doesn't mean that we want to exclude out all of the other possible options, but rather that we want to use a multiplicity of channels that reinforce one another. So on the same page here, but we'll have to look for a better word. But just maybe one point to close. I think this is only one. We've been talking about channels a lot, and it's one part of the challenge. But as a sector, we love pilots, we love technology, or we think we do. But in a couple of decades, I guess, in the system, we also have not been terribly efficient at responding to some of the most basic information needs that people say that they have over and over again. So if I look again at our findings from our multi-sector needs assessments across several countries, people always report the same very basic information needs. They want to know how to register for assistance, they want to know what's available in their area, and they want to know how to get food. I think we're the three ones that come up the most. These are all things that people have been saying over and over again, and we have to admit that as a system, we are not providing this information in a centralized way. And I think there's a reason for that is beyond technology, and is also about how we, perhaps as a system, are so used to finding our own potential beneficiaries and target audience. We're not used to them finding us, and it makes us completely unable or unwilling to share the most basic information that people would need.
Thank you. I think a very salient point to finish on there. We have plenty of time for questions for the panel. If those in the room have questions, feel free to put up your hand, and then we'll come online in a second as well. Yes. Yes, please. And if you can introduce yourself at the same time, please. And we'll collect a couple and then go to the panel after.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. So my name is Fernanda Baumhart. I'm independent CA expert. So I was just wondering, I was going back to the title of the panel, and I think you were quite ambitious in a good way to put together communication, participation, and accountability. I heard a lot of examples in terms of information, communication, but not so much in terms of closing the loop, accountability in the sense that how can digital, or maybe if digital, can really support meaningful engagement and meaningful course correction, because I think this is where the conversation really needs to go, or else we're just rolling out. I'm not saying that's not important, but how are we really using digital to influence programming and PCM? So anyone, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Yes.
Thank you. Leith Baker from USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. This was a great conversation, and thank you so much for putting this together and taking the time. I had two questions. One for the panel. One was about scale. You know, how close are we to really achieving here? You know, are we just at the beginning of seeing the scale of these services, or are we very far along? And how do we get there? That was one. And then I really liked the point that you ended on. Is it Margot from Reach? This idea of we're used to going and finding our affected populations, our beneficiaries, the folks we serve. We're not so used to them coming to us. How do we change that?
Great. And do we have any more in the room for a basket of three? If not, we can stay with the ones we have. No. All right. So does anyone on the panel want to take that? We have how do we move past just communicating to closing the loop and being actually accountable? We have how do we take the pilots or the technology to scale? And then how do we reflect on Margot's comment around users coming to us and asking us for assistance? Who wants to go first? Yep, Margot.
I can attempt an answer knowing that I'm very protected by the fact that as Reach we do no programs, actual programs, we do research. So it's going to be very easy for me in a way to comment. But I think if anything, we should try to invest as much as possible in platforms that will allow people to connect and organize. So currently when we want to involve people or affected people into decision making, we try to identify one entry point or two, like a certain set of organizations that we'll invite at the table and that we'll engage with, but it's usually quite limited. And in a way, this engagement is, even when we manage to include people, it's behind closed doors. It's not terribly public. So I think we could imagine platforms that we don't necessarily have to set up ourselves. I think that can set themselves up organically and be set up by local actors, but where people engage, connect and organize to kind of claim what they think their communities deserve from humanitarians, and actively point out the stuff as well that is not needed, and that we keep providing without kind of responding to a clear problem. So that's a beginning of an answer, but perhaps others will have more tangible examples of how to make that happen.
Again. Yeah. So at the UNHCR, what we have committed within the 5-year plan on accountability to affected people was, in fact, one of the streams was to close the feedback loop. This means is how feedback can impact on programming and on reporting, on just the whole redesign of the way that we work, part of the transformation and change initiative of our organization. I can give you some examples on how we are trying to achieve that. It's not yet fully in place, particularly if you think about the digital. We have been working on stream and harmonizing the way that we receive feedback, and indeed the whole part of receiving has always been left for the last. This is something that has happened all throughout. However, we are trying to make sure that reporting mechanisms, reporting plans and programming, and include KPIs that are specifically attached to AAP, to accountability to affected people. More often so whenever operations have a digital engagement opportunity, that KPIs related to specifically digital engagement is assessed and also reported upon. What is the level of complexity of that implementation of the feedback that is being given? Let's say in a very tangible example, if within the help sites, and this is the information channel, fully acknowledge, if the feedback that is received, do we monitor it? Is it a monitored platform? How do we open the feedback? Next layer, what the feedback demonstrates that we are achieving people's expectations, we are not. Comparison to other offline and attempt or contact centers or other digital engagements. Compare the mechanisms, implement, make sure that our management is giving due consideration to the resource allocation, may it be financial or human resource allocation that is needed to attend to these channels more and more. So it's not an exercise of just create this page for me. It's not an activity that is additional to our TORs. It is our TORs. It is our main activity at one point. And additional, we make sure that the more part of funding and the considerations to the project, really attaching them to our AAP commitments, making sure that they reflect what the latest stage within this self-service initiative that I have mentioned before, there is this intentional effort to make sure that the feedback that we will receive whenever we open any type of additional channel needs to be implemented in a way that is impactful, but also that takes into consideration to data protection information and our limitations itself. Last but not least, the community quite often requests that we make public some of our findings, our reports, having participatory assessments, consulting the community, and never giving the feedback is something that is quite often seen within the organizations or any type of initiative. But making sure that it's intentional, that we get back and we validate the findings and make sure that they are participating in the decision-making processes and so on. There isn't a very good intention and a very big effort. Perhaps it's not yet at the advanced level, I must say, and that's a very good point that you make.
So just walking down the line then. So to address the question of accountability, I suppose in many of our answers, it was inherent, I suppose, we were talking about communication and two-way communication as part of the accountability process. Because, I mean, to answer this specifically, it should always goes back to what I mentioned earlier, which was, why are you using these tools? And it should really serve accountability. It should be part of this. It should be either through part of, are you using it, again, ask yourself, is it going to be designed as part of feedback collection? Is it part of dissemination? Is it part of one-way communication? Or why are you doing two-way? Is that to collect feedback? Because once you start working in a social media space, for instance, and you start posting things and engaging, people will comment, and that is one part of feedback. Is that part of your plan? Are you planning out survey systems? Are you using sort of like direct messaging blasts to people using digital phones, smartphones, and to get people to connect that way? So it's got to be part of your absolute planning. It can't be something that we want digital space because we want one. That's not good enough. It needs to know how it fits into this, and it should absolutely fit into that. The other thing about accountability, again, what you mentioned earlier, to mention here about transparency, both Margot and Anne mentioned, it is actually it's something that's being underexploited. It is a fantastic transparency tool. A lot of the feedback collected is available and accessible online, just really hard to access online unless you know where Relief Web is. You can access a lot of the understanding what's going on there. People want to know, they can. But why isn't it made in a more accessible way? Why isn't it presented? Do you have any attempt to make that kind of information more accessible, to know how it's being used, why surveys being conducted, a timetable? It could be something, it is the possibility for increasing accountability and then genuinely holding ourselves, speaking as a sector, to account and allowing people to see what we are actually doing with the data is there. None of it is that confidential. That has to be because it's already on Relief Web. It's just very, very hard to find if you don't know where to look. So it can be done like this. And one of the things that we jokingly discussed before about whether it was possible was to make meetings available online. And I do mean that in a response situation, certain meetings could be made online so that everybody could access it, total transparency. That could be something, we could think whether it's how far do you want to go with that? It's because one of the things about accountability that's discussed is that we always talk about accountability to the people affected, but the information is kept within. The information that's not to do with digital, that's to do with the hoarding of information. And the idea of waiting until it's ready to go. So the interesting thing about digital engagement space is the opportunity there is that people react very quickly and timely. Normally, if you post something up, hard comments come about 90 minutes. After that, nobody really looks at it anymore. It's fallen down the feed. Are we prepared to work that, to be that transparent? And that's a question that raises. But first of all, foremost, all engagement, all digital use should start with, why are you doing this? Do you have a decision framework? Why are you doing this? And accountability should be at the heart of that.
Thanks, Fernanda. I love the question. The so what? What's it all about? And I think for us, the secret is in the name. It's about closing the feedback loop and letting people to do that through an existing mechanisms that there to close it across languages, across the literacy divide. And it's at 3 levels. So the first level is the individual asks the question, has a complaints and feedback. They can be directly responded to. Then you have the qualitative and the quantitative data that anybody can access in an open platform to be able to have what about, how does that influence our programming? What's the feedback? How's that changing over time? And that can be used for adaptation and course correction directly with the programs that where you're seeking feedback. But it can also be used at a high level around accountability and the transparency element, in that you can see changes over time and you can use that to inform decision making, whether that's where you're going to be changing your program location or funding policy decision making as well. So it's this, the idea is very much in the so what and having it open. Yeah.
Great, thanks. I mean, we heard a lot about the accountability question. I think less on the other two.
Yeah.
People think about it if they want. I mean, one, I think, great example on the people coming to us, and is one that sticks in mind. I'm sure many agencies are doing it, but I'm sure lots of us saw the work of the Norwegian Refugee Council in the Ukraine response, where they created kind of self-service access to services. So essentially people on the move could contact NRC through a digital platform and give their situation, and it was linked directly to cash transfers, it was linked directly to information services. So, and this was done with technology partners. So definitely there is a shift towards, and I'm not quite sure self-service is the correct title, but definitely accessing with your own agency a service. There is something there that maybe in the next few years we'll see coming through. I'm told there's nothing online on questions, so if people online, please do. Is there anything else, anyone else in the room with a question? Yes, and then we'll come to you afterwards.
Hi, I'm Mohamed Al-Noemi. I'm also an independent. I come from a digital engagement background in the private sector, where it's relatively easy to find your audiences, because your audiences they usually self-identify, and if you're working in, say, not in development context, they have the spare time and energy to engage online in quasi philosophical debates on how to get to the right answer. As a new humanitarian and somebody who's really wanting to transfer these skills into the humanitarian sector, the questions that I've had, that I've been trying to find the answers to in meetings such as this, is how do you solve the participation problem in the humanitarian space? I hear a lot from the people here on the panel about getting feedback and maybe closing the loop from feedback to accountability, but how do you then give agency to those people giving you the feedback? There are people there who are already solving these problems for themselves, who already have real world agency. How do you use digital engagement to enable further agency in the participation? And I'm not really seeing that in the responses so far. So far, it's been mostly about accountability. Does anyone have any examples of agency? I see that somebody does, and I'm excited to hear them. Thanks.
Hi, this is Ricardo from UNHCR. While information management and digital engagement are not a sector in itself, they are gaining more and more importance. And seeing that we are here in the HNPW, that we have Sphere and other type of standards, would there be a sense, or is there already existing standards on digital engagement and information management, or would it make sense to develop those? Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll try our luck for a third question if possible for the basket. Still nothing online. Okay, we'll go with what we have. So who on the panel wants to take on? We've got how can we maximize the participation angle of the conversation, and then also a question on what do we think about standard setting on this question for the sector?
Yeah, so you're speaking really to what we're trying to do, and it's about locally owned, open. So if the data is open source, then local people can use that. They can use that in their own advocacy. They can use that to inform their own decisions. And it's not about two-directional, it's about multi-directional conversations. If it's open, then it's not up to one organisation or one actor to solve a problem. It's about how does the chief of the village, can he engage? Can other actors, volunteer groups, other people in the community also input and involve and share or answer questions? That's the idea is much more around this agency, local knowledge, open data, and being able to build off that, which is a real opportunity, I think, with technology if it's done correctly. if it's done in a way that's about sharing power.
I'm going to address that partly by going back to the scaling up question as well. Is that the interesting about participation is that we have examples of people using digital space was interesting, because one of the things is that in a lot of refugee crises, especially, a lot of the refugees have a lot of digital skills, and some of them formerly ran private online engagement companies of sorts, and their resources are not often used. So one of the things that is hard to find, and this is something I found working in Europe, is that it was really hard to, this was working in Southern Europe, was that it was very hard to scale up, to scale up and find the people with the skills, the language skills, and the cultural context, until we realized was that they were right in front of us. And it was a case of engaging the people who already had the skills and meeting them where people were. And it was a case of then the approach they took was very much effectively market research approach. It was a commercial approach to going, where do people communicate, what platforms people were using, and by having people who from the same area. It was increased participation, increased the way people were working, and then that built credibility that allowed to scale up more. And then you hit the buffer that digital engagement is not cheaper than in-person engagement. It costs about the same. And that's another barrier. I mean, this is the example which we played, referring back to the example we mentioned before, which was that they work hand in hand. It's a good way to reach communities and build trust and build your brand. Online, everybody is a brand. Your trust needs to be earned. And so it was a case of using participation was utterly critical to that. And that was basically to step back out and understand that we didn't have all the answers, and we basically had to effectively subcontract, sublet, so like involve and partner up with people. And participants are absolutely key, because otherwise you end up with, as you mentioned, large digital spaces that nobody goes to, which are fully integrated and work really well together and are scaled up as a site, as a location, but don't have that linkages. So because we all tend to work in places where we don't move in quickly, we move in quickly, and we don't have time to build a relationship, with the exception, as a scaling up and participation, in areas where disasters frequently happen, in places like the Pacific, in places where earthquakes happen. There, the long-term investment in finding out those linkages and building those networks together and embellishing that as a regular preparedness plan, that would be a way to both increase participation, because you build the connection, build the networks, and you don't scale up. You can scale up, prepared, ready to scale up when needed. And again, it's not cheaper than in person. It's part of the package. And so that's hand over.
I'll add a good example that what we are doing is empowering the local and community-led organizations to take ownership. There is this good that there are routinely funding opportunities from our innovation services, for example, that is refugee-led organizations that will develop what is appropriate to them, what they think will work best for their own context. The consultation processes, they sound like a survey that people are sent out via mail and they tick boxes and they return, but it actually can take variety of forms. You can have an online consultation, make sure that the platform that you develop, may it be a website or a communication channel, may it be a partnership with an organization, and then for a box or a training of people that are in the front line to routinely consult the operation and ask questions and ask, although it's not the immediate focus of their engagement, perhaps, that they take that opportunity to consult and make sure that they understand what they are doing. Leaving doors open for the community-led organizations and community initiatives and creativity, not only to develop, provide capacity development opportunities, but also that as a result of that capacity development opportunity, there's a linkage to how they can contribute and generate something that is meaningful and tangible for them. Perhaps those can be a few examples. And Ricardo, to your question, because we are not going to forget to answer to your question, I feel like in the digital, it's particularly difficult to come up with policies and standards and like our traditional way of thinking about policy on how we engage. I think there's a need to adapt as well to digital. What are the levels and how often we revisit them? Because as opposed to the offline protection work, we would issue a policy that would be revisited, let's say biannually. For example, in the digital, as you can see in March with ChatGPT, there's been this massive boom that changed everything. It changed at least the most prominent and burning questions that we were receiving. Perhaps this is something that we can definitely agree, and I guess this is part of the interagency standing committee's role as well, to really make sure that we as humanitarian organizations are working together and understanding what are the minimum standards that we would adopt for each one of them. What are mitigating measures to any type of risk that we might be exposing by poorly designing platforms and communication channels and digital engagement?
Yes, Ricardo, sorry. I do want to address that as a point as well, just quickly, because was that it is, I think one of the issues is the incompatibility of system information that's created, because at the moment we're still in a stage where there is a level of competition. I think, and that's the thing, is that maybe something, a minimal compatibility of working on this. And one of the things, we have decision frameworks for all kinds of things, maybe decision framework on this, that, to make sure that what we're working with comes to an interoperable standard of some sorts, because otherwise one of the key parts of misinformation is the fact that it's that similar things happen and people access it in different ways and they end up in competition. So I would say that, I mean, there should be some kind of comparison site, even for people to access, make it accountable and put one base. So that's forced us to be compatible with this. So,
Margot, we have 1 minute. Do you have final thoughts?
Okay, very quickly, maybe going back to the initial question, if you're coming from the private sector and trying to shift the humanitarian sector, I would say maybe hold on to some of your private sector instinct for a little while longer, because as humanitarians, we're really not used to looking at the kind of products and the information that we share as something that we should trash if no one is using it, and if it's not, and if there are no clients for it. So maybe this is actually something that we need to do a little bit more actively, and in a way, enabling agency, I think for me, is purely about making sure that the most basic information that people need is available in the most intuitive way where and when they might need it. This would deserve some more unpacking, but perhaps in another webinar.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you everyone for joining. I've put the contact details of everyone on the panel on the screen. Everyone in the room or online, feel free. For those of you in the room, we will all be hanging around for a little while and happy to take questions. But thank you again to the panel for what I hope everyone agrees was a super interesting conversation.